A great example that I love to go to is COVID. Disabled people have been fighting for decades for the work from home accommodation, but it was only made accessible when non-disabled people needed it. It benefits everyone. Just listen to disabled people.
Thanks everyone, it's great to be here today. I'm particularly excited to be here today because this is Disability Pride Month, and that's because this is the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the civil rights legislation in the United States that is foundational to some of the conversation and the topics that we're going to have today. And it's also foundational to a movement that's happened across the world, where the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities has taken some of the lessons from the United States. And at this point, other countries are going farther, faster in terms of recognizing disability talent. So it's exciting to be here. I'm Rylin Rodgers. I'm the Disability Policy Advisor at Microsoft. That means as a disabled woman, I get to be who I am. Live my favorite thing, which is disability policy. It's my identity, it is my hobby, and I'm lucky enough that it is my job. So,
I love that intro. Hi everyone, I'm Keely. I'm the CEO and founder of Making Space. Making Space is a talent acquisition and learning platform for companies to train, access, and retain pre-qualified disabled talent. I did not grow up as a disabled person. I acquired my disability when I was 17, and I went through about 4 years of misdiagnosis, being not believed by the medical system and having quite a traumatic time. And when I came out the other end, I started to experience a world that was no longer built with me in mind. And when I moved to the US, I ended up losing a job due to disability discrimination. And then that's when I started identifying as a disabled person, because I started to recognize that the world around me was not built with us at the forefront, and that we are disabled by the inaccessible society that we live in. And before then, I didn't realize that we had rights. And it is so important that we do recognize Disability Pride Month and the 34th anniversary of the ADA, because that is the foundation on which we build upon.
So we're here to talk about disability employment, and I feel like it is a tale of two worlds, and sort of the good news, bad news. So I'd love to sort of think where you're seeing, what you're experiencing. For me, there's the excitement that the percentage of people living with disability who are participating in the workforce grows, and it continues to grow, and is by some measures, at its highest rate. At the same time, it is really fair to understand that it is persistently under where it should be, and we are leaving out tremendous amounts of talent. In the United States and globally, people with disabilities are about twice as likely as people without disabilities to be unemployed, and those of us who are in the workforce are very likely to be underemployed. So when I think about what that means to disabled people, it's a challenge, and what it means to our economy, to our communities, to our businesses, it's a profound challenge in terms of what we're leaving out. As an entrepreneur and somebody who's working on the skilling side, what do you see as the good and bad of where we are in terms of disability employment?
I think we still rely on such old, broken systems. I think, as an example, so when I moved to the US, I wanted to get a job within the entertainment industry. I previously was a dancer, couldn't do that anymore, so I wanted to find my way back into a world that I was really passionate about. And I started to look at job descriptions and realized that there was this constant prioritization of stamina over talent. And genuine skill was not being recognized. It was, can you lift a certain amount of weight? Can you drive a car? Can you do all of these things that I couldn't do? And I think getting access to early quality careers really prevents us from having that career advancement and having that continuous employment within the workforce. So I think there is still that, which is why what I'm trying to focus on is building new structures, building new systems. So what we're doing at Making Space is looking at, okay, can we build accessible, on-demand education that directly correlates with that job that is hiring, and from that create this pre-qualified pipeline of talent who may probably have been overlooked within the traditional systems. And also, I think and believe, and what we've seen is that that actually also creates better outcomes for the employers as well. It helps them with retention, with productivity, and getting higher quality candidates for those roles.
I love that, and it also resonates with me, this sort of awareness about disability as part of talent and part of who we are. I'm old, like super old, and so I've had a winding career, and I've had different parts of my career where I've been asked to hide or not disclose my disability as I progressed. I remember having a job in academia where the section director said, "We would like to make you faculty, but please don't tell anyone about your disability because we don't want that." To a place now where the last several jobs I've had, I've been hired partly because I'm out in terms of my disability. So that's interesting. And then at the same time, I've seen this exciting change that you're a part of, where we can claim our greatness as related to our talents that come from lived experience related to disability. It's a little thing, but on LinkedIn, under skills, I have listed dyslexic thinking, which is super cool. It's not listed under accommodations that I need. It's listed under talents and skills because my brain is all kinds of unique and does some extra things. I mean, creative spelling is absolutely one of the things it does, but the way that I process in 3 dimensions strategy is a talent that gives me an edge. And I see that in tech, maybe more than other industries. I know that we're recruiting disabled talent because it helps us be successful. It makes better products. It's our deaf engineers, our blind engineers, our neurodiverse engineers that are building the best products for everyone. And I think that change of narrative helps us get away from those sort of ridiculous constructs where I've had jobs before that said you had to lift 35 pounds. I can't lift 35 pounds. And also, the job never actually required it. No. So why are we doing that? And instead, can't we embrace the talents?
Yeah. And I love what you touched on too around dyslexia. And I think a lot of people have this misconception around what disability actually is. I think when we look at the percentages of disabled people and the stats that we have globally, it says 15% of the global population are disabled. I personally believe that is closer to 40%, maybe even 50%, because a lot of people, A, are terrified of disclosure, but B, don't even know if they are disabled or not. People often put us in kind of pockets, so chronically ill, neurodivergent, disabled, and don't really understand that actually someone with dyslexia, someone with autism, someone with cancer, someone with diabetes are all disabled. And we all deserve accommodations. We all deserve to be able to have pride within our identity. And also being Disability Pride Month, I think something that took me a very long time to realize was that we can still be proud of being disabled, but have a complicated relationship with our medical conditions. But I think that self-disclosure piece is really important, because if we don't know we're disabled, if we don't know that we can get access to accommodations, then we have stagnant career growth. We have a workforce who can't really be themselves and bring their whole selves to work. And we also get the wrong data, which leads to a lack of resources and inclusion.
Yeah, I think that self-ID and that data is really important because it's also about intersection. We're all multifaceted people. I mentioned that I'm dyslexic and have been dyslexic my whole life, and that's always been sort of my primary disability identity. COVID happened. I also have a pulmonary condition called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and instantly the world changed. And the thing that was most disabling about me was my medical condition, because I couldn't go outside. Like, I had to hide in my bubble. And so those realities that any one of us can experience disability that's different because of environment, and the reality that how it intersects with race, with gender, with socioeconomic and educational background is about who we really are. And when we can break that down, it lets us bring our talent in a new way. You know, when you think about what we want in organizational leaders, don't I want somebody that has that diversity of experience, who has that perspective, who's had those earlier today somebody said about makes it sharp, tension makes it sharp. I forget his quote, it was great. I'm going to write it down after I...
Is it iron sharpens iron?
Iron sharpens iron. Thank you. Now I don't have to chase him down in the hallway. But it's really that reality that we have so many strengths, but if we're not creating a space where everybody can talk about it, where do we really get from there? You also have a bit of star power, and you talk about the interest in the entertainment world. I would love for you to share a little bit about media representation and what you think that means in terms of disability pride and what's happening in that space.
Yeah, I think representation is so unbelievably important, and we often don't realize and recognize that the media will influence the way that we think about people, whether we actively realize it or not. And I truly believe to change the world, we have to learn to tell and listen to a new set of stories about the world that we want to create. And I, previously to founding this company, Making Space, I created a company called See Talent. And I called it See Talent because disabled people often don't get access to option A or option B, and we have to create our own option C. But that really was to change the narrative, because we've often been stereotyped as either the villains, the victims, or the inspirations. And if we think about the impact that that has on employment, oftentimes employers will see us and think, oh, I don't know, I have assumptions about what we can or cannot do. So when we start seeing ourselves differently in the media, and it will have a much wider impact. But have you felt that as well?
I think it's a big piece of the puzzle. To me, it's about representation. How do we be out and proud? How do we see ourselves in every space? And some of that comes from the history of policy. I'm, as previously mentioned, really old, but I love seeing people that identify as being part of the ADA generation. Disabled people who have never lived in a world where they didn't have civil rights protection. And that sort of change and shift. And so I think about it all as connections to how do we start to make the progress. Like in my world, I think we need massive public policy change. And there's a couple key things we need to do with the employment space. The first, and I think long overdue on my list of things, is we need to get to wage equity. In the United States, it's still legal to pay disabled people less than the minimum wage. And that cannot and should not be. And there's a way to fix that through legislation in front of Congress right now. But it takes seeing ourselves, knowing who we are, having representation. It takes having disabled leaders in elected office. It has all of those pieces have to work together to get to what we want as a society.
I'd love to get your thoughts too on what I think is really the poverty cycle that disabled people often get stuck in because of SSI, SSDI. What are your thoughts around reform, change in that area?
Deep cleansing breath. Basically, to use a technical term, it's a hot mess. Our disability support systems are outdated. They were created for a world where we presumed and assumed that disabled people couldn't or shouldn't work. And so we have created a system where your income and asset limits to get the services that you need to be alive and be who you are in conflict with each other. And it is no longer 1930, and we've had special education law since 1975. And so we have multiple generations of disabled people who are educated and ready to work, and yet our employment policy has not bridged that gap. And there are real and active ways it can and should change. I've been working in policy for over 30 years, and so I'm aware of pragmatic realities. Currently, there's not a lot of bipartisan collaboration. Are we in Washington or are we in Washington? But this is a bipartisan issue. Disability is not about a party, it's about all of us. And when we think about the fact that our outdated policies are blocking our economy and blocking our ability to bring talent, that should be a place where we can come together. So there are active things we can do. We can pass income and asset limit changes in SSI. We can allow for Medicaid buy-in. Washington State allows any income to still buy into Medicaid if you're a person with a disability. That's a great model. You can pay for it if you're making tons of money, but you don't have to lose your opportunities to get the health care that you need. You don't have to make that choice. And those models should be where we're moving.
Yeah. Employers are leaving talent on the table, leaving money on the table, and we often talk about the massive economic power that the disabled community holds. And it is so important to recognize because it is a huge missed opportunity from an employee standpoint, from an employer standpoint, and from a customer standpoint as well. But something that I'm very passionate and talk a lot about is how, whilst I think that economic power conversation will get us into rooms, it may not necessarily keep us in those rooms, and we have to address the fundamental human rights issues, and that has to be why we are continued to be in that conversation.
Yeah, it's all the layers together. It's the fact that this is about civil and human rights. It's about that this is about our economy. It's about political representation and making sure that communities include every single person and reflect who we are. And that gets us to where we all want to go. It helps businesses be successful. It helps us reach our goals. It helps you, break back into Hollywood in a big way. And I'll expect to have an autographed copy of the movie, or I don't know. We'll have to see what it is. Is it a movie? Is it a TV series? What is it going to be? But I think it's those pieces where we lean forward. I'm also aware that all of this is happening at a time of dramatic technology change. I joke that I'm not allowed to leave my house without talking about AI, and it's only kind of a joke. But I think there's pros and cons. I know there's pros and cons there from a disability perspective. What are you seeing? What are you worried about? What are you excited about?
So I'm more on the excited side right now. I would say it's a really amazing opportunity to level the playing field for disabled people. So at Making Space, we've been doing a few different things around AI. One of the things is building AI into our product. We actually have a tool that turns the lived experience of disability into transferable skills. And the other piece of the work that we've been doing is we recently partnered with Indeed, and we are looking at research and data that they have around the most in-demand skills that employers are looking for around AI, creating that education, making it accessible on Making Space, and creating those pre-qualified pipelines of disabled people and connecting them to the employers that are in need of those skills. So I'm on the more optimistic side.
Yeah, I love that because it speaks to one of the things that we're learning, that in order for AIs to be ethical, it has to be accessible. In order for it to be accessible, it needs to be designed with and by disabled people. So that talent pipeline is incredibly important. I'm also on the excited side because I've been seeing the positive use cases. I get to use it because I work at a tech company and it's really cool. I'm aware of the challenge of getting to really good protections across some civil rights concerns. And I think about that as a conversation we should all be having. So my favorite sort of timely example about that is around voice. And we might have all heard stories about deep fakes in elections and the ability to clone someone's voice. You also can have really amazing positive disability use cases around voice for individuals who've lost their voice through acquired disability, whether it's ALS or something else. A member of Congress actually just gave her testimony on the floor of the House 2 weeks ago because she's acquired disability and can no longer speak with her voice, but is now using an AI device that has her voice that was banked from previous speaks, so it still sounds like who she is. And I loved that, and I loved getting her to see her do that, but I'm aware of the privacy concerns about biometrics and others, and how do we have a real honest conversation about what AI looks like and what the regulations are, so we can protect privacy, we can protect civil rights, and we can ensure that those accessible use cases are possible.
I love that.
So we have 1 minute left. What's the call to action? What would you want employers to be doing to get us to a year from now to a different place around disability employment?
So many things. First and foremost, invest in new systems, create new systems, and learn and lead with disabled people. And also normalize disabled people being experts in subjects beyond just disability. The other piece I will say is, again, listening to disabled people is so important, but also then taking action on what they are saying. A great example that I love to go to is COVID. Disabled people have been fighting for decades for the work from home accommodation, but it was only made accessible when non-disabled people needed it. It benefits everyone. Just listen to disabled people.
Yeah. I think I would add to really look and do the data on where you are in terms of disability representation. Do that look to see, are you leaving out talent, or do you have talent that it doesn't feel comfortable telling you about who they are and talking about their disability? Because then you're missing part of who they are and part of what they can bring to the table. You know, I want a world where every company and every workplace reflects the world that we live in. And that means that you should have 25%, maybe 40% of your workforce being disabled talent.
Rylin and Keely, thank you so much for this conversation. We have a few minutes now for Q&A, so any questions? Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, really good to see you both. My name is Diego. I mean, you know, but I lead Together International, which is the largest accelerator for founders with disabilities. And so I'm curious, you can speak about what role do you see entrepreneurship playing in this? I think you touched on the importance of disabled people leading, and yet we see that entrepreneurship is often not accessible for a lack of resources, funding opportunities. So in your view, what role does entrepreneurship play in all this?
So passionate about this subject, yes. So disabled entrepreneurs are 400 times less likely to receive funding than non-disabled entrepreneurs. And oftentimes disabled people naturally lean towards entrepreneurship because we have a natural ability to problem solve, and we are very creative, and also the workforce tends to be very inaccessible. I also personally, because of my disability, had to drop out of school, so I didn't have a formal education, and I found it very difficult because of what was on paper to get any job. So I had to go into the entrepreneurship lane. But also disabled entrepreneurs are much more likely to employ disabled people and underrepresented people. So it is imperative that we fund and support disabled entrepreneurs. And I'm really grateful for VCs like Jobs for the Future Ventures, JFF Ventures, and ASA, who have invested in Making Space and who are showing and seeing that actually disabled people don't always need to lead nonprofits. We can absolutely run and build scalable, venture-backable businesses.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is the importance for companies of all sizes to look at not just their hiring, but their supply chain. Where are you buying from? And being aware about disabled-owned businesses who are often entrepreneurs who are bringing incredible talents, incredible products, and really including that in to your procurement and really using that as an opportunity to build a bigger infrastructure of disabled businesses on all levels.
Hi, I'm wondering if you have any advice for employers about talking about their inclusive work environment and hiring people with disabilities, but not tokenizing that at the same time. Like, where's the balance in that?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So that's always a hard question for me because I only think about disability and I just think it's everywhere and everybody should be talking about it all the time. But I think that's part of the answer, that if it is a regular part of your hiring process and accommodations are available continuously to anyone who applies, and it's entirely part of the interview process, accessible accommodations are available for the onboarding process, then it becomes the culture and not the exception, and it's not the other. A piece of that I have found to be surprising when I entered corporate America, surprising in a positive way, is at Microsoft, every employee is required to take accessibility training. And I sort of thought, what do I need to take accessibility training for? Like I write accessibility training. And I've sat through a lot of accessibility training in my 50 years. And most of it's total crap. But this accessibility training was really good, and it's part of the culture. That accessibility is everyone's responsibility, and it's our responsibility in how we work with each other as coworkers and how we work with customers. So I think those pieces of culture change get to where it is not the other and it is part of who we all are.
That was a great answer. I mean, I would just echo exactly what Rylin mentioned, and making sure that it is a business imperative. It's not just a one-off initiative that can get cut when budgets get cut. It's truly tied to the fundamental business strategy of the company.
I saw a hand over here if you still have your question.
Yeah, I can just use the mic. Thank you both. You both nailed this conversation. It's been a pleasure hearing your perspectives and your insight and your experience. My question is based on sort of my ideas about inclusion. So something you both remarked is that the number of people with disabilities is way higher than what we even know. And what resonated with me was that you said that in terms of your promotion, someone had mentioned something to the effect of, just don't tell anybody about your disability. And so it just made me think, there's so many people around me in my workplace who I may not even know have a disability, but that's a tremendous impediment to them bringing their authentic self to the workplace. So if you could sort of talk through best practices so that we as employees can provide a more inclusive workspace that makes people want to show up all the way themselves, and so we can celebrate that and use that as an asset to our companies.
Yeah, one thing that I start with is making the assumption that whatever I'm putting out into the world is going to disable people. Because the reality is that it's a digital world now, and so whatever I'm putting out is going to be forwarded. So looking at my email, my Word document, my spreadsheet, my PowerPoints, and before they go, always hitting the accessibility checker, which on Microsoft products is right next to the spell checker, which I'm best friends with. And so it's great because over time, then you learn some basics of accessible documents because it corrects your errors and helps you get there going forward. And those kinds of steps, and then taking it to the next level of always opening a hybrid meeting with directions on how to turn on the accessible features, on the captions, on the different ways that whatever platform you're using. And just think about, are there ways that I can make my work accessible by design so that no one needs to miss out in terms of what I have to offer? And those little changes often create a space where somebody is more empowered to say what they need or ask for the missing part. If there's a reflection in your actions that this is part of how you want to function in the world. So I always try to look for the ways that I can create an environment. And some of it's about physical environment. I'm really fun in public. So one of the things that often happens in public spaces where there's elevators is people put like a potted plant or a trash can right in front of where the elevator buttons are. And so if you're a person who's using a wheelchair, then you can no longer reach the elevator buttons. So if I'm out in public, I'm forever moving the potted plants because like why? Why are we creating a world where there is an option for somebody and then you're creating an unnecessary barrier? The same thing exists on the city streets where we have curb cuts to get on, but now somebody leaves their e-scooter and creates an inaccessible path of travel. I moved those too. I'm telling you, I'm having a good time. But it's really thinking about what can I do every day in the way I act in the world to create a world where more of us can be fully who they are.
Rylin, Keely, thank you so much. Everybody, please join me in appreciating them.